Hi everybody, Wayne Davies here, Spectrum Econs on the Hive blockchain. As you can see behind me, I'm out by the lake, one of my favorite spots where I like to take Mango the dog and talk a lot about this in my ActiveFit reports. You should go in and check out my ActiveFit reports because I don't just have ActiveFit reports that's purely about activity. I'd say about 80% is probably about my content, my other content that I've done in the week. So, check those out if you can. Short little summaries that are fairly useful. All right, so in today's video, I'm going to be covering off on something that I covered off in one of my posts. Oh, it's a while back now, probably at least 10 months old. I want to present it in video format, and that's kind of something that I promised, I think about a month or so ago, that I was going to, revisit some of these posts. This one, a fairly simple one. It's nothing particularly groundbreaking. I'm going to be talking about basically myself and some of the work that I've done as an economist. So let's wind the clock back now to when I was at university. Ooh, when I did my master's degree, I guess you could call that the early stages, I suppose. I did it in high school as well. So I also did I've been doing economics for a while. Okay, so where do I begin? Probably my master's thesis, and that was about education. It was actually a struggle coming up with the whole education theme. I was hoping to do something related to game theory, but my ideas weren't really being covered by any of the lecturers at that time. So education seemed like an easier topic to work with. And I had a fairly good advisor to cover me off on that. So that's why I went down the education route. But it wasn't just purely about education. It threw in a few other concepts in there as well, just to make it a bit more interesting. So in terms of education, I was talking about higher education. I believe the title was, "Is the pursuit of higher education worth the cost?" So it's basically, it was taking a hypothetical look at whether you should pursue a higher education in terms of university, pursue it in terms of, this is based in Australia, so I think it was certificates, that they have various certificates, so a shorter duration, or go straight into the workforce. And how I went about doing that was I did this thing called intertemporal choice. So that's looking at a period of time in terms of, let's say, it would be the period that you study, as well as maybe like another 10 years after that. So if you go straight into the workforce, you can earn money straight off, right? Whereas if you go to university, you may get a scholarship. Most people don't. If you don't get a scholarship, then you've got to pay university fees, or maybe your parents do, or, you may have some other arrangements with your government you've got to pay about later. But anyway, that's a cost, and also you're not earning. But normally with a university degree, you can get a higher pay when you go into the workforce. I say normally, doesn't always work out that way. Some people make bad decisions and get a university degree you can't really use, and, may end up doing something they could have just done from, when they left high school. And also there's certificates. So this is looking at trades. And then of course there's a wide range of different salaries you can get with trades. So you might do a course like a year, then you might have an apprenticeship for a couple of years, but you're earning during an apprenticeship. So if we assume that people make right decisions and, they are optimizing their strategies, you'd be looking at a higher income after degree, a slightly lower income if you're in a trade, and then your lowest income would be if you just left high school. Let's assume that. And the way I looked at it was in terms of utility. And this is where you got this big sacrifice up front. And this could be big because as a university student, there's a lot of things you can't do if you're not being supported by your parents, of course. And you forego a lot, not just in terms of money, but in terms of what you can do. You may end up with loans and all sorts of stuff. And for some people, that is a big cost. And this intertemporal model looks at it in terms of utility rather than its direct dollar values, as well as we have discounting effect that goes in as well, which I'll talk about later with cost-benefit analysis. Another thing, a concept that I brought into this was relative utility. So there's several types of way of measuring utility. So it could be ordinal. That is basically comparing, is A better than B, better than C, better than D? Or you could have cardinal, which you assign a value like we call them utils. So 5,700, or it could be 3,200, etc., etc. You make comparisons that way. I wanted more than ordinal, but cardinal didn't make an awful lot of sense either. What is a util? No one really knows exactly, but we've got relative utility. So that takes a cardinal approach. So let's say 5 utils compared to 2 utils, well, that's 2.5 times greater. Whereas you get someone else who could be 5,000 utils compared to 2,000 utils, that's also 2.5 times greater. So we do it on a relative approach, put it that way. So How many times better is it for you to pursue higher education than it is for you to, let's say, just leave high school? And you could have a situation where it could be 1.5, or maybe that would be, okay, slightly better to pursue university education, but it also could be 0.8, for example, which you may have been better off just going straight out of high school and getting a job. And we added a few different characteristics around that. So we had, was it for men? What is it for women? Different wealth, different innate ability as well in terms of your chances of succeeding. After all, you could take up a university course and fail. If you've got a very high chance of passing and you get a very high quality degree, then it's going to be better for you afterwards. So we factored in stuff like that. And then we use these comparisons to say, well, which group of people would be better off actually going to university and which would be better off without doing that. So that kind of wraps up what I did with my thesis. After university, I went to work for the government and I joined Queensland's Department of Main Roads. I think it became Queensland Transport and Main Roads a little bit later on. This is where I did cost-benefit analysis. This is where I spent most of my career. It would have been about 8 years. That was fascinating. This is basically comparing your benefits, which a lot of it is in terms of what you call road user costs, because we did infrastructure for roads, transport and main roads. Right? That would be in terms of your time saved, operating costs of vehicles like fuel, tire wear, damage and things like that, safety aspects as well. And then these would we call benefits, but they're more like cost savings to users. So if you have a project, you'll have positive cost savings. But all of these, of course, will cost money. You know, you have to pay to build the roads or the bridges, whatever you might be doing, or your bus lanes and stuff like that. And also there's the maintenance side of things and operation side of things. So we put those clearly into costs. And that goes to basically the infrastructure body or the government. So you get your benefits and you divide them by costs. And we have what we call a benefit cost ratio. If it's greater than 1, then your project is considered a goer. You can also do that in terms of net present value. Do your benefits outweigh your costs? And then of course we have various options. So even if you have a positive net present value, there could be another option that has even greater net present value. So you wouldn't look at it as just one project. Unfortunately, that was the case a lot of times. So I did a lot of this, and gosh, I did almost like 100, I think it was in the end, in various forms of projects and programs. Oh, there's a train. There you go. Not always the ideal setting. Anyway, so projects and programs all combined, it was like between 50 and 100, I think it was altogether. Various CBAs that I'd done. So there was a lot of that. My next step was when I left that, there was some, lack of progression, should we call it, within Transport and Main Roads. So led me to another organization called Building Queensland. And this is something that I developed, not entirely from scratch, but it's called a social impact evaluation. I think it was called a social benefits analysis or something like that. So I changed the name of it because not everything that comes out of a project is necessarily a benefit. So we call it an impact, because some benefits can be positive, some can be negative. We might call that a disbenefit. We call it an impact is probably a better way of putting it. And plus there was something else called social impact analysis. So we changed the analysis to evaluation, so it was a little bit different. And this is something that I developed up over time. Got a bit of input from people here and there. It's always useful. People have a different angle on that. It was a mostly qualitative analysis. So you get a group of people and they would identify what the various impacts are. Are they positive? Are they negative? And this would be, you would use as many stakeholders as you possibly can, I guess, relevant stakeholders. And then some of these impacts would then go over to the cost-benefit analysis. Some of these impacts that can't be monetized will be kept out of that, and they could be discussed in terms of whatever quantitative value you have, or even if it's qualitative. Because sometimes you can't even quantify it. I know it's a weird concept, but yeah, it's true. I'll talk about this in another video. So this was interesting, and actually had a whole paper that came out for it that was on the Building Queensland website. I think they've changed a lot now the last year, so a lot of that has changed. But you had impact risk assessment that became part of it, as well as, what's it called again? Appraisal summary table, where you take information out of your risk matrix. So you know what a risk matrix is? It's basically determine the extent of the risk and the likelihood of the risk, and it's presented like a square. And then that's taken out of that, and then we put it in an appraisal summary table. So that's like a big long list of all your various impacts. It can be taken from all over the place. So, and then you can assess it in the short term, medium and long term. And you take those results around there and express whether they're positive and negative. And it's just a way of displaying information. So it adds a bit more beef, should we say, to your cost benefit analysis. And that was something that the government were pushing for because, well, like I said, not all cost benefit analysis actually support the decisions they make. Again, it is a difficult one to say whether social impact evaluation, oh, another train. Oh, we've got 2 trains now. So anyway, whether social impact evaluation supported the CBA. I didn't do an awful lot because I was focused on the guidelines, and actually only there was about a year. And then I moved on from that. And after I moved on from that, I actually set up my own business. And I was there as a consultant, I guess following through with some cost benefit analysis stuff, helping build models, or should I say maintain models that I built in the past, which didn't have people working on them, so I got back involved with that. Also did the business case analysis side of things as well, which also included some cost benefit analysis. But that's also when I started on Steam about 4 years ago, and Steam, and hard fork become Hive, so I sort of continued through with that. And that's given me a lot more flexibility to look at the things that I really wanted to look at. And like one of those things would have been game theory. And I had a lot of ideas around game theory that I really wanted to elaborate on if I was going to become an academic, which I didn't quite get to do with any other jobs out there. So I've elaborated on a lot of that stuff in a lot of my posts. So for example, as you can see here, game of pandemic. So it looks at it in terms of a game theory. So that could be any multiple number of people, as we call them players. And they're trying to create their own best optimal outcome for themselves. So you'd have things like, you may have heard of prisoner's dilemma. That is a situation where you pursue your optimal strategy. You actually end up worse off than you use a cooperating strategy. You may have the chicken game. Again, that's a show of commitment to a particular decision. Gets you through, or how to say, with a better outcome if you've got greater commitment. What else do we have? Oh, battle of the sexes. Again, that is where 2 parties cooperate to come up with a better decision, and a few other things that I did as well in terms of game theory. I think I had what I call the triple threat. That's going to be difficult to explain in a video, but basically it's like having additional players getting involved and how weaker players can cooperate to challenge, smaller players can cooperate to challenge some of the bigger players, and how that changes things around. So how that affects business, for example, it should prevent businesses becoming too large because the smaller businesses have incentive to compete with them and also cooperate with each other to keep them in hold. But of course, that doesn't always work out in the real world, and there's lots of other reasons for that other than just theory. Big word would be government. Anyway, that's a story for another day. What else have I done? Oh yes, I've done some stuff as well relating to, well, I think I called it vegan economics. Then I changed it to cruelty-free economics. And now I want to call it compassion economics. I know they're different names. I didn't like the connotations, some of the negative stuff with veganism. Then I realized cruelty-free, you can never really be cruelty-free. So moving towards compassion. So what that looks at, and this is me feeding off being a vegan. And when I become vegan, I learned a lot. I guess it wasn't so much learn, but kind of opened my eyes to how potentially, how cruel we are to our environment and the species around us, in the sense that, you look at factory farming and stuff like that for food and for goods, and I don't know, you have your kennels and stuff like that in terms of our pets, even entertainment and science and stuff, a lot of exploitation. And I talk about how we can actually get out of all that and how we can, start treating animals with a little bit more respect rather than using them as just, items almost, in a sense, to just improve our lives, because, well, they are sentient beings. They're not, like a tool. You can't just pick it up, whatever, like a rock, whatever, they have, how to say, they are in a way like us. That's why you'd call them sentient beings. So I wrote a whole lot of stuff about that. And in terms of placing value on their lives as well, as some of the work that I've done, I got an ecosystem approach as well as, wiping out one whole load of species of animals, or we're sort of domesticating another whole load, has a huge impact on the entire global ecosystem. And I've done quite a bit of work on that. Not as much recently as I'd hoped, but you can go back in there and have a look. and how I've gone about attempting to value animal lives. Some of the stuff I've adopted from how we value human lives, as well as looking at things like intelligence, as well as life expectancy and stuff like that. So that's worth taking a look at. Some other stuff that I've done, you can look at it in terms of the blockchain. I used to write about Steam all the time. I write about Hive occasionally as well as the, how the inner workings of this. It's so sort of interesting how the upvotes and downvotes and all this works, and how the rewards you get, and how the high power affects all of this. And basically a whole interactive system, how you want people to use the Hive power to essentially distribute the rewards as fair as possible. And then there's the whole gaming of the system, people self-voting each other, then people countering that with downvotes, and all of that is very interesting. And it's an experimental system that I think can be adopted in actual bigger things. And I talk about that in terms of the blockchain government, as well as the blockchain economy. And I got 2 posts on that where I sort of, actually think it's more than 2. I can only remember 2 off the top of my head. We talk about a blockchain government, so we're using consensus to make decisions rather than what we have with the current government structure, representative democracy, where you just vote people in every 5 years, even though in a 2-party system, you really have no say on any of that. So it's not direct democracy per se. That is completely inefficient, and I've also covered that in some of my posts as well. But it's a mixture of a sense of the two in a way, and where you specialize on certain things. So yeah, you have to look at the post to find a little bit more about that. What else have I done economics related? Oh yes, I did this series last year. It's called Manage, Solve, Prevent. It's basically looking all at the key areas from a manage, solve, prevent. So we call it prevent, solve, manage perspective. Start off with prevent, so that's preventing something from happening. Solve is to solve something once it's occurred. And manage is if you can't solve it, if it's already happened and you can't solve it, is to minimize the side of it. And most of the time, prevent is the better approach, though that is not always feasible. So you may want to go with the solve, you get rid of the problem when it arrives. And then of course, management will be the last approach. And you can approach almost anything that way. You can approach, let's say, healthcare that way. You can approach crime that way, housing that way. You identify what the potential problem is, so you can prevent it. And if the problem arises, then you come up with a way to solve it. And last of all, you come up with a management. And it's amazing how you can apply that across so many areas. And I talk about it in my, at least 10 posts, I think, on that sort of system and how that goes about. And wow, where does that leave us now? I guess that my most recent stuff is I'm kind of looking at the COVID-19. Again, this is more of a broader analysis, I might say. Not so much anything completely unique out of that, but it's definitely valuable in the sense that where is all this taking us? And then this follows us through to what's being called the Great Reset, which has been triggered, should we say, by COVID-19. Though a lot of these plans have been in the works for a long time. So we had the 4th Industrial Revolution and stuff. That's been talked about for a number of years, and that's now being pulled into what's being called the Great Reset. And that is what the World Economic Forum are involved with. And a lot of things are being pushed forward very, very quickly because of the amount of power the governments have managed to seize through all these COVID restrictions or lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. So that's some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about this year. This is more on the informative side of it rather than being completely unique on that, but it's definitely something important. Oh boy, I think that's come to the end of what I want to talk about, I think. So far, I covered off on a lot of things, haven't I? Yeah, I think we'll call that quits on this video, hopefully. I don't know how long I've rambled on for. You find some of this stuff useful. This is, like I said, this is talking about what I've done as an economist all the way back from university through my working years, and then some of the stuff that I've explored independently and also publishing through Hive. So like I said, this is not the sort of stuff I'm going to get paid an awful lot of money for, but it is stuff and it gives me freedom, and there are ways to earn money without necessarily having an official, what we call, employed job. You can have your own business. Economists, that can be tricky, but you can make things happen as well if you have saved up some money and you can invest in some of these blockchains, like I've invested within Hive. And hopefully, fingers crossed, if this bull run goes well, then that could pay my future in terms of what else I want to do. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully, not too much interruption in regards to sound. I had a few trains come by And we got birds tweeting away right now. Yeah, but I kind of like it here in the outdoors. It's like a little bit different than presenting things within the office or within the home. Anyway, thanks guys, and see you around.